I just want to briefly touch on what a normal season is and how abnormal we are now. But essentially what it means in terms of the nutritional requirements of the cow and calf, where we are, what the options are in terms of drought management. A lot of that's already been talked about. And then feeding options, which is where I'm going to focus most of our time. We've already talked about a little bit. Glenn talked a little bit about the energy value of different feeds and some protein issues. In many cases, protein is going to be a limiting nutrient, so we've given some attention to different ways that we can supplement that. So might as well go with that. Some of the best data we have in terms of the seasons, at least where we define what our grazing seasons are in this kind of environment, come from the 1930s, and some of it from the San Joaquin experimental range further south. But if we follow this out to present day, we'd see a similar pattern, with rainfall starting in the autumn, cold weather coming in, and then our grass growth, as previous speakers have mentioned, really coming in the spring. We have a really short growing season. So if we divide our year into inadequate green, adequate green, and inadequate dry, that pretty much encapsulates what we're dealing with. And we've seen this in a slightly different form. We've tried to match the availability, the quantity, and quality of the forage so that we have the maximum amount of nutrients available at the time when our nutrient requirement is the highest, which is actually right before weaning the calf. I mean, sure, by that time the cow's lactation has already declined. She's not requiring as much nutrition for making milk, but on the other hand, the calf is eating quite a bit too, and so that's when we have our maximum level of demand. And if we match that to our maximum level of grass growth in March and April, then we're doing a good job of matching our system to the environment. In a situation like this year where we don't have our normal seasons, that's why the early weaning is such a thing that you need to consider. Okay, normally what happens as forages grow, the quality tends to decline, and we saw some of that already. The fiber content, cell walls in those plants increases. All the good stuff, protein, energy, vitamins, minerals, tends to decrease, and especially that happens as after we get some rain and the nutrients leach out of that forage. And so this is a shot of a much better year here on the station. This is where we are right here today, and you can see the difference that water makes when you have irrigated pasture versus that dry range. But there's a lot of dry matter in this kind of forage. When we have that kind of year, there's a lot of material there, a lot of cellulose, potentially a lot of energy for the cattle, but it's deficient in other nutrients, particularly in protein and some of the minerals. Okay. Also some of the vitamins, things like vitamin A and E that Dr. Martin talked about this morning. So, and again, like I said, we didn't rehearse this, but I just want to remind you of the residual dry matter issue. And so, if we have this kind of situation, we're in great shape, right? We can find a way to feed the cattle and preserve the range. But once we get to where it looks like outside now, then we're really bumping up on these minimal RDM standards, and we need to consider that in terms of our feeding program. I don't have to go through this. I thought somebody would show this map. This is a drought map for the United States, and this shows where we are right now in the red zone. So this year, we don't know. I mean, it started raining. When I put these slides together, we haven't had any rain and no rain in sight, and we may not have these normal seasons. What happens if we're flatlined for the rest of this season? I mean, let's all hope for a miracle March, right? Like we saw before, but nobody knows. That's in God's hands. And really it becomes a matter of how much risk are you willing to tolerate, what kind of bets you're going to lay in terms of keeping the cow herd, keeping your young stock, or saving the ranch. Sometimes you've got to take the bull, bite the bullet and take a hit with the cattle, but at least you save the ranch and your kids and grandkids will thank you. So having said all of that, in terms of supplementation, and that was kind of some of the work that we did with Jim, but after that, we got into different ways that we could supplement. And it strikes me that when we look at that dry standing forage, like I showed in that picture before, and we look at some of the straws that are out here, they share a lot of characteristics in common. When you're talking about dry forage that's pretty low quality nutritionally, it's got some energy there if we can only extract it. But we're going to have to make up the difference in the nutrients that are lacking. And in particular, the thing that we need to remember is that we don't feed cattle. Okay? We don't feed cattle. We feed the bacteria that live in the animal's rumen. Okay? And then they'll take care of feeding the cow. We need to take care of feeding those bacteria. And so when we look at forages out here, or the dry forage that's out on the range, and it's 3, 4, 5% protein, guess what? The bacteria can't live on that. They need between 7 and 8% minimum, okay, so that they can grow. And so for the bacteria to grow and take this nitrogen and make microbial protein, they're going to use nitrogen that's in the diet, and they're going to use whatever energy is there, for example, cellulose, could be fiber. They'll use fiber as long as they have access to nitrogen. Okay? And so that's where you need to think about the supplementation. You're not necessarily supplementing the cow. You've got to supplement the bacteria. Right? And so protein is great, and there are a lot of protein sources you can use. You know, soybean meal, feather meal, cottonseed meal, a lot of real protein sources. But we can also use other nitrogen sources, things like non-protein nitrogen, like urea, because as long as there's energy there, the bacteria will make that into microbial protein, and then the animal will see that as protein. Okay? And so that's kind of the strategy that we adopted for this kind of work. Okay. This just shows some of the similarities between samples that we've taken of dry range. In this case, it was about 5.5% pure protein. Rice straw, variable, but average around 4. Wheat straw about the same. In terms of TDN, they're all pretty bad, around 50%, sometimes less than that. Okay, again, highly variable. So remember, that's just an average value. High fiber, and then calcium and phosphorus. Range is actually pretty good in, most of our grasses are pretty good in calcium, but they're deficient in phosphorus. And so that's something to think about. And of course, all the other microminerals as well. I'm not going to get into selenium, that kind of thing that we all pretty much know that we need, we're in a deficient area, we need to use boluses or something else. Okay.
Can you point out the ash, Roberto?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, for most of our range grasses, this is dry range, it's been rained on and leached. Ash content gets pretty high, around 10%. That means that whatever the animal is going to eat, 10% of it won't yield any energy or any protein because it's mineral, it's ash. Okay, if you take that material and put it in an oven or a furnace at 600 degrees, all the organic material is going to burn off, and you're left with the ash. 10% is pretty high. Rice straw tends to be much higher than that. Okay, so you've already lost 18% of your potential energy just because there's such a high ash content in that material, and most of that is silica, okay, which is basically what sand is made of.
Do you have a number for Medusa head and goat grass on ash?
I don't. Does anybody else have that?
Medusa head's about 12.
Somebody said Medusa head was 12.
Goat grass is lower. I don't know exact.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But what I wanted to point out here is that if we look at, for example, a 1,200, I used a bigger cow than you, John. I haven't seen a 1,000-pound cow. But if we look at a 1,200-pound cow, 4 months post calving, more or less where they'll be down in the near future, her protein requirement in the diet is about 9.25%. Okay, so clearly, if we use any of these kinds of feeds, we need to think about supplementing protein. Okay. First of all, for the bacteria, and then also to meet the animal's requirement. Same thing goes with energy. We got to bump that up. And then calcium and phosphorus, you can see in these cases that might not be too bad, but we're going to have to do something about phosphorus. Okay. So I'm going to describe a study that we did over 3 years, from 2005, 2006, 2007, here on the station. And this is kind of a pattern. Whenever we do the studies like this, we try to repeat it because no year is the same as the next. And you know, you really need to be careful looking at the results of one study done over one season. So we tend to repeat these several times, and sometimes you change things as you go along. But what we did is we took, you know, commercial tubs. I'm not going to, mention any brand names, Crystalix. That's a pretty good tub, and pretty widely used. It's low labor. You put it out, and kind of forget about it. 30% protein, and we developed our own range mix that we wanted to use based on the feed analyses and what they thought the animal was going to eat, and try to really meet the requirements. We needed to get the crude protein up to 54%, and the only way we could do that is using non-protein nitrogen, in this case urea. Okay, and then we tried to balance out the minerals as well and put in some vitamins, because we knew that dry range was pretty low in these fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, in the last, after the first year, we decided to do something a little less labor-intensive, and so we made up our own protein tub with a similar composition. Okay, but in a tub format. So that's that. First year, I had a graduate student, and I said, okay, you know what, move up to Sierra, live there, go feed the cattle every day. And this is done with growing heifers, by the way, not with cows. The heifers are nice because you can weigh them and see their weight gain. It's a lot easier to work with than cows, but the same principles would apply. And we just had our standard out feeders, and he hand-fed the cattle every day. That turned out to be way too labor-intensive, so the second year, we developed some self-feeders that, again, nothing fancy. This is homegrown stuff, but we had some old missile casings we got from military surplus, and then we built a feed box on top of that, and it kind of looks like this. Something anybody can put together in their own shop, and that way we fill the bin and it self-feeds. You get out there once a week, and they work pretty well. Okay. And then for the tubs, which look like this, everybody knows what a tub looks like. But I tell you what, that turned out that, well, that's basically used our mineral and vitamin premix, molasses, soybean meal, canola meal, and Portland cement. Okay, the urea is in that premix. Portland cement, that's what we use to harden it. The commercial folks have ovens and whatnot, they bake it, but we didn't have any of that. We're mixing it in a cement mixer. Okay, and the whole idea is to do something you can do at home. Okay, and that turned out to be a major hassle, but it did work. It gave us a tub that the properties. We had to mess around with the formula until we got it right. Anyway, over the 3 years, just to show you, started out about 500 pound heifers, got them up to 570, 580, and with the commercial tub, we had about 1,700 of a pound gain over the summer, okay, per day. With our supplements, we got much better performance in them. And clearly, they weren't getting enough protein with those commercial tubs. They ate more of them, and I should mention that intake here is limited by salt and also by the hardness of the tub. So they ate a little bit less. So they gained much better at a much lower cost, which is actually what we were trying to achieve. Okay, this just shows the same data, but in a graphical format, showing the body weights at the beginning for each of the groups, and then at the end, where we get an extra 30 pounds of gain over the summer. Okay, in terms of weight gain and the cost. Anytime we can get improved performance at a lower cost, I think that's we're doing our jobs.
Bob,
Yeah.
you sure it wasn't the cement adding the extra weight gain?
Well, there's no cement in the range mix. Anyway, just to bring that to a close, those calves grazing over the summer really could benefit from a higher protein. And by the way, the mix that was done, made for us, the pre-mix was done by Gilbert's. And Marita Rana is their nutritionist, been a friend of ours for many years. When I sent her the formulation, she called me and said, "You made a mistake. I mean, there's way too much urea in this feed. You're going to kill your cattle." I said, "Leave that on me, okay? We'll get them adapted." And you know, we ramped them up. We didn't give them it all to them at one time. We got them adapted. It took about a week, and no problems at all. No toxicity, no nothing. Okay, so definitely higher protein can benefit those animals. We had about a 30% improvement in gain and a 40% reduction in cost compared to commercial type. Okay, once we developed the specialized feeders or the tubs, we were able to really eliminate a lot of that hand labor. So it worked quite a bit better. Okay. A lot of students and some colleagues and friends helped us out with this project. Everybody really could swim. So I just want to acknowledge everybody that worked on it.
I have a question. When you talked about the intake was less with a more solid supplement, would you prefer a solid supplement to a liquid supplement then?
No. I have no preference one way or the other. If I'm using urea, I don't think I would use a liquid supplement. Okay. Urea, you can have a problem with microbial action there, and then production of ammonia, which is not something you want to have. Okay, but even the liquid supplements where you have the feeders that will limit their intake, you're probably going to be okay as long as you keep it in urea. But yeah, liquid's fine.
How can I get some more information on the tubs that you're making? The homemade tubs. Where can I find more information on that?
Well, as a matter of fact, there's several resources online about making homemade tubs. I got a couple of them from the Australian Department of Primary Industries and also from FAO. But my email was up there for a minute. I'd be happy to send you all the information about how we made them and the formulation and everything else.
It's kind of a multi-pointed question, but first of all, in those tubs, is it safe to say that the added labor maybe wasn't accounted for because it was a grad student? Maybe you another point of the question is, did you guys follow up with those heifers and track anything because the ultra high levels of urea on fertility and longevity of the cattle, or was it strictly just gain?
Okay, those are really good questions. First of all, the question about the labor being graduate student labor. That's true. We had when we manufactured the tubs, there was quite a bit of labor involved in making the tubs. But once they're made, you set them out and forget about them. So I mean, you put more labor up front, but then you don't have to be feeding them every week or every couple of days. So in terms of labor, I think maybe that might be a wash. The tub's probably less labor overall. The second question had to do with, did we follow those cattle forward? And yes, we did. And we got a very similar relationship between, well, we didn't look at body condition score. We simply looked at weight.